Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I'm Gabriel, 32, a software developer from Boston who's always been the reliable yet invisible son. When my parents invited me to that special family dinner last month, I had no idea it would change everything. Halfway through our meal, Dad stood up and made an announcement that left me stunned. I simply smiled, placed my napkin down, and walked out without a word. They never saw what was coming next. Before I dive into this story, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and stick around to see how I finally showed my family exactly who they'd been overlooking all these years. Growing up, I was always living in the shadow of my younger brother Tyler. While I excelled academically, consistently bringing home straight A's and academic awards, Tyler was the social butterfly who everyone adored. He played football, dated the popular girls, and had this natural charm that made adults gravitate toward him. Our parents, Robert and Margaret, never tried to hide their preference. I still remember my 16th birthday when I received a set of reference books while Tyler got a brand new car for no special occasion the very next week. Or Christmas when Tyler would have stacks of carefully wrapped presents while I'd get practical items like clothes or gift cards. It wasn't that they neglected me entirely, they provided the basics, but there was always this undercurrent of disappointment, as if they'd hoped I would be someone different. The contrast became even more apparent during high school events. When I was valedictorian, my parents attended the ceremony but left immediately after to get to Tyler's regional football game. My speech thanking them for their support felt hollow even as I said the words. The small party they threw me afterward seemed obligatory, while Tyler's athletic achievements, even minor ones, were celebrated with enthusiasm and genuine pride. My saving grace during those years was my grandfather William. He was my father's father, a shrewd businessman who had built a moderately successful real estate and investment company from nothing. Unlike my parents, Grandpa William saw something in me. He recognized my analytical mind, my attention to detail, and my natural understanding of business concepts. "You've got the mind for building something that lasts, Gabriel," he told me during one of our many private conversations in his study. "Tyler's got flash, but you've got substance." When I turned 15, Grandpa William began mentoring me in business. While my parents thought I was just helping an old man with computer problems, he was actually teaching me investment strategies, property evaluation, contract negotiation, and the intricacies of building and maintaining wealth. These sessions became my refuge from the constant feeling of inadequacy at home. "Your father was always like this," Grandpa confided once. "Looking for the quick win, the flash. Never understanding that true success is built methodically, brick by brick." He never outright criticized my parents' treatment of me, but his disapproval was clear in subtle ways. When it came time for college, my parents made it clear that their educational fund would primarily go toward Tyler's tuition, even though his grades barely got him accepted to a state school while I had scholarships offers from several prestigious universities. I chose MIT for their computer science program and worked multiple jobs to cover what my scholarships didn't. I rarely went home during those years, finding more peace in my cramped apartment and exhausting schedule than in my childhood home. During college, I began applying what Grandpa had taught me. I started small, investing the little money I saved from my campus jobs. By senior year, I had built a modest portfolio that was performing surprisingly well. I also created a few apps that generated passive income. Nothing that made me rich, but enough to demonstrate that Grandpa's lessons had taken root. After graduation, I landed a job at a leading tech firm in Boston, quickly advancing through the ranks. Meanwhile, Tyler had dropped out of college by his junior year to pursue the first of many entrepreneurial ventures, a sports bar that failed within 18 months. My parents liquidated some investments to help him cover the debts and immediately funded his next idea, an upscale clothing boutique that lasted barely a year. This pattern continued for years. Tyler would come up with a new business concept, convince our parents it was a sure thing, secure their financial backing, and then run the business into the ground through mismanagement, partying, or simple lack of follow-through. Each failure was somehow never his fault. The market changed, his business partners let him down, the location wasn't right. And each time, my parents would console him, assure him of his brilliance, and fund the next attempt. All the while, I continued building my own success quietly. I was promoted several times, invested wisely, and even purchased my first rental property by age 27. Yet when family gatherings occurred, my achievements were footnotes at best. "Gabriel's doing fine at his computer job," my mother would say dismissively before launching into enthusiastic details about Tyler's latest doomed venture. The extended family followed my parents' lead. My aunts and uncles would politely ask me about work before eagerly engaging with Tyler about his newest business idea. My cousins gravitated toward his charisma at family events, while I often found myself alone, nursing a drink in the corner. I didn't mind much. I'd grown accustomed to it, and focused instead on building a life that brought me satisfaction regardless of their approval. The family business that Grandpa William had built was officially run by my father, though in recent years he'd become more of a figurehead than an active manager. The company had been struggling to adapt to modern markets, and when Grandpa noticed this during his semi-retirement, he quietly asked for my help. "They're stuck in the 90s, Gabriel," he told me during one of our regular lunches. "The company needs someone who understands both traditional real estate and how technology is changing the game." So I began advising behind the scenes, modernizing systems, suggesting portfolio adjustments, and helping navigate the shifting real estate market. I never took credit, allowing my father to present my ideas as his own, and never asked for compensation beyond the satisfaction of preserving my grandfather's legacy. All of this formed the backdrop to the events that would eventually unfold at that fateful family dinner. Years of being overlooked, of quiet contribution, of watching Tyler fail upward with unwavering parental support, all while I built success in the shadows. I never complained, never confronted, never demanded recognition. I simply carried on, honoring my grandfather's approach to success, steady, methodical, and with a long-term vision. Little did my family know how significant that approach would eventually prove to be. Everything changed 3 years ago when Grandpa William received a terminal cancer diagnosis. He was given 6 months, though in characteristic fashion, he managed to stretch it to nearly a year through sheer determination. During those final months, our private conversations took on a new urgency and depth. "I've been watching for decades, Gabriel," he said during one of our hospital visits, his once robust frame now frail against the white sheets. "I've seen how they treat you, how they favor Tyler, despite all evidence that he's incapable of handling responsibility." I tried to downplay it, as I always had. "It's fine, Grandpa. I've made my own way." "It's not fine," he insisted, with a flash of his old fire. "And I've made a decision about the family legacy." Over the next several visits, Grandpa William revealed that he'd been quietly restructuring ownership of the family assets, the business, the main family home where my parents lived, which had been in the family for 3 generations, and several investment accounts. Through a complex legal arrangement I didn't fully understand at first, he had been gradually transferring controlling interest to me. "But Dad thinks he owns everything," I said, confused. "Your father has been operating under management rights, not ownership," Grandpa explained. "I never fully transferred the assets to him because, frankly, I didn't trust his judgment. I've been watching both of you. You're the one who should steward what I've built." He introduced me to his attorney, Patricia Winters, a sharp-minded woman in her 60s who had helped execute this plan. She explained the legal structure. A series of trusts and holding companies that placed the assets under my control, though the arrangement wouldn't be fully apparent until certain triggers occurred. "I don't know about this, Grandpa," I said, uncomfortable with the secrecy. "It feels like going behind their backs." "I'm not asking you to take anything from them," he clarified. "You'll see that I've ensured they'll be taken care of. But leadership and control need to be in capable hands." His eyes, still sharp despite his illness, held mine. "Your hands, Gabriel." Before agreeing, I made him promise that the arrangement would include provisions for the family's well-being. Despite everything, they were still my family. Grandpa agreed, and we spent hours discussing how to structure things fairly while ensuring the business and properties would be protected from Tyler's inevitable influence. "I want you to promise me something," Grandpa said during one of our final conversations. "Give them a chance to recognize your worth on their own. Don't reveal this arrangement unless absolutely necessary." I promised, though I doubted that moment of recognition would ever come naturally. When Grandpa William passed away, the initial reading of his will seemed relatively straightforward to the family. My father was named as the business manager, the family would continue living in the main house, and various smaller bequests were distributed to family members. What wasn't apparent to most was the complex ownership structure underneath that gave me final authority on major decisions. Only Patricia Winters and I understood the full picture. After the funeral, she took me aside and handed me a thick envelope. "These are the documents you'll need when the time comes," she said. "William had faith in you. So do I." In the 2 years that followed Grandpa's death, I honored my promise. I continued advising on the family business from the shadows, making suggestions through carefully planted ideas that my father thought were his own. Under this arrangement, the company actually flourished, adapting to changing markets and expanding in strategic areas. I took no credit, asking only that certain profits be reinvested rather than distributed. Meanwhile, I was legally taking ownership of everything, signing documents Patricia prepared, attending closed meetings with business partners, and quietly becoming the invisible power behind the family enterprise. The family home's deed was transferred to my name, though my parents continued living there exactly as before, unaware of the change. Investment accounts were restructured under my control, though the family still had access to the funds. All the while, the family dynamic remained unchanged. Tyler launched 2 more failed businesses, a premium dog food delivery service and a specialty cocktail bar, both of which collapsed within months, requiring parental bailouts. My mother began hinting that Tyler should have a position in the family business, suggesting he had fresh ideas that could help, despite his track record suggesting otherwise. My own success continued growing. My tech career advanced to senior leadership, my personal investments multiplied, and I bought a comfortable but modest home in a nice Boston neighborhood. I started dating Amelia, a pediatric surgeon who understood ambition and family complexity. Unlike previous relationships that had wilted under my family's dismissive attitude, Amelia saw through their behavior immediately. "They have no idea who you really are," she observed after meeting them at a holiday gathering. "And that's their loss." The tension in the family began increasing, as Tyler's failures mounted and my invisible hand kept the business successful. My father would comment on his business decisions that were actually mine, while in the same breath lamenting that I hadn't found direction in my life beyond playing with computers. The cognitive dissonance would have been amusing if it hadn't been so frustrating. A breaking point seemed inevitable, though I didn't know exactly what form it would take. I continued honoring my grandfather's wish, giving my family every opportunity to recognize my contributions naturally. But as another year passed with nothing changing, I began to wonder if the moment would ever come when I would need to reveal what Grandpa William had arranged. That moment, it turned out, would arrive sooner than I expected, and in a form I could never have anticipated. The invitation came on a Tuesday, a formal text message from my mother, asking me to attend a special family dinner the following Saturday at Rossetti's, one of the most expensive restaurants in Boston. "Your father has an important announcement to make about the future of the family," she wrote. "Everyone will be there. Your presence is required." The formal tone and the word "required" immediately set off warning bells. In our family, important announcements were rarely good news for me. I called my mother for more details, but she was uncharacteristically vague. "It's about the future, Gabriel," she said, her voice carrying that forced cheerfulness I'd learned to distrust. "The whole family will be there. Wear something nice." That evening, I discussed the invitation with Amelia as we prepared dinner in my kitchen. "It sounds suspicious," she said, chopping vegetables with the precision of a surgeon. "The formal invitation, the fancy restaurant, the mysterious announcement. What do you think it's about?" Knowing my family, they're probably going to announce Tyler as the new president of the company or something equally ill-advised, I replied, trying to sound casual despite the knot forming in my stomach. Amelia put down her knife and faced me. "And what will you do if that happens? Will you finally tell them the truth?" I hesitated. I promised Grandpa I'd give them a chance to recognize my worth on their own. "And have they?" she challenged. "It's been nearly 3 years, Gabriel. Your grandfather wouldn't want you to be a doormat forever." She was right, of course. I'd been patient, perhaps too patient. If they make some grand announcement that undermines everything I've been doing, then yes, I'll have to tell them the truth. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. As Saturday approached, my sense of foreboding grew. I received texts from cousins expressing excitement about the big news, and my aunt called to make sure I was definitely coming to celebrate. No one would give specifics, but it became increasingly clear that everyone except me knew what was being announced. On Saturday evening, I arrived at Rossetti's exactly on time, dressed in a tailored navy suit that Amelia had insisted looked perfect on me. The maitre d' led me to a private dining room in the back, where I discovered my entire extended family already gathered. My parents, Tyler, 3 aunts and their husbands, 2 uncles and their wives, and 6 cousins. I was the last to arrive despite being precisely on time. The room was elaborately decorated. Flowers adorned the center of the long table. Expensive champagne was being poured, and I noticed a photographer setting up in the corner. This was clearly no ordinary family dinner. My mother air-kissed my cheek. "Gabriel, you're here. Wonderful." She gestured to an empty seat at the far end of the table, as far from the head where my father sat as possible. Tyler was seated at my father's right hand, dressed in a flashy suit with an ostentatious watch glinting on his wrist, likely another gift from our parents. He gave me a smug nod but made no effort to greet me properly. The first hour of the dinner was filled with awkward small talk. Relatives asked perfunctory questions about my job that they didn't listen to the answers for. My mother kept shooting excited glances at Tyler. My father kept checking his watch, seemingly waiting for some predetermined moment. "So, Gabriel," my Uncle Philip asked between appetizer and main course, "still working with computers?" "I'm actually the director of software architecture now," I replied. "My team just launched—" "That's nice," he interrupted, turning to Tyler. "And Tyler, I hear things are looking up for you? Your father's been hinting at big changes." Tyler smiled mysteriously. "You could say that. Tonight's a new beginning for me. For all of us, really." The pattern continued through the main course. Family members made brief, disinterested inquiries about my life before eagerly engaging with Tyler about his future prospects. I noticed several of them had gift bags tucked beside their chairs. This was clearly a celebration, not just an announcement. As the waiters cleared our plates and prepared to bring dessert, I caught various family members exchanging knowing looks. My cousin Rachel actually winked at Tyler. My mother straightened her posture and nodded at my father, who stood up and tapped his glass with a spoon. The room fell silent as everyone turned expectantly toward him. Everyone except me seemed poised for something momentous. I felt my stomach tighten as I realized this entire evening had been orchestrated for whatever was about to happen. Before dessert arrives, my father began, his voice carrying that pompous tone he used for important occasions. "Margaret and I want to thank you all for coming tonight to share in this special moment for our family." He looked around the room, his gaze touching on everyone except me. "As you know, the Mitchell family has a proud legacy in this city. My father built a business that has supported our family for 3 generations. That legacy is something Margaret and I have taken very seriously, especially when thinking about its future." He placed his hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Which brings us to the purpose of tonight's celebration." I felt something cold settle in my chest as I realized exactly where this was heading. Part of me had known from the moment I received the invitation, but hearing it unfold in real time was something else entirely. My father raised his glass, and everyone at the table except me followed suit, already grinning in anticipation of what was coming. "As you all know," my father continued, standing tall with his champagne flute raised, "a family legacy is only as strong as the person chosen to carry it forward." He looked down at Tyler with unmistakable pride. "Margaret and I have given this extensive thought, and we've made our decision about the future of everything we've built. The business, our home, our investments." The room was electric with anticipation. Several relatives were already smiling broadly, clearly aware of what was coming. The photographer had positioned himself perfectly to capture the moment. My father's voice rose dramatically. "We've decided to leave everything to Tyler. He's the only one who's ever made us proud." The table erupted in applause and congratulatory shouts. Glasses clinked, and several relatives rose to pat Tyler on the back. My mother wiped a theatrical tear from her eye while beaming at my brother. "Tyler has shown the entrepreneurial spirit and bold vision that a family like ours needs to thrive in the future," my father continued once the initial cheers subsided. "While others have chosen safe, conventional paths here," he finally glanced in my direction for a split second. "Tyler has demonstrated the courage to take risks and think big. Exactly what the Mitchell name deserves." I sat perfectly still, my expression neutral despite the burning sensation spreading through my chest. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. to celebrate Tyler's entrepreneurial spirit when every single one of his ventures had failed spectacularly, when the only reason the family business was thriving was because of my unseen guidance. More painfully, this event had clearly been planned as a public humiliation. The formal invitation, the photographer, the extended family's presence, all designed to make a spectacle of elevating Tyler while diminishing me. This wasn't just an announcement, it was theater. My Aunt Elaine stood up, glass in hand. I'd like to add that Tyler has always embodied the Mitchell family spirit, bold, charismatic, a natural leader. She smiled broadly at my brother. The company couldn't be in better hands. Uncle Philip chimed in next. I've always said Tyler was destined for greatness. He's got your father's instincts, Robert. One by one, family members added their endorsements, each comment more effusive than the last. No one, not a single person, looked in my direction or acknowledged my presence. It was as if I'd become invisible, a ghost at my own public dismissal. In that moment, a strange calm washed over me. The hurt and anger remained, but they were overshadowed by a profound clarity. This performance finally freed me from any lingering obligation to protect my family from the truth. My grandfather had asked me to give them a chance to recognize my worth. They had just definitively proven they never would. As the accolades continued, I gently placed my napkin on the table, stood up, and walked toward the exit. No dramatic gestures, no angry words, just a quiet, dignified departure. I was almost at the door when my mother noticed. "Gabriel, where are you going?" "They're bringing out a special cake for Tyler." I turned slightly, offered a small smile that didn't reach my eyes, and walked out without saying a word. Behind me, I heard my father's dismissive comment. "Let him go if he's going to be like that. This night is about celebrating Tyler." As the door closed behind me, I heard Tyler begin his acceptance speech. "I'm truly honored to accept this responsibility." His voice faded as I walked through the restaurant and into the cool night air. In my car, I sat for a moment, hands steady on the steering wheel. I pulled out my phone and texted Patricia Winters. "It's time." Her response came immediately. "I've had the papers ready for 3 years. My office, 9 a.m. Monday." I drove home with a strange sense of peace. The charade was finally over. For years, I had maintained the illusion that my family might eventually see me clearly. Tonight had conclusively proven otherwise. And in doing so, they had freed me to honor my grandfather's true wishes without reservation. When I arrived home, Amelia was waiting up, concern evident on her face. "How bad was it?" she asked, as I loosened my tie. "Exactly as predicted," I replied. "A public coronation of Tyler as the heir to everything, complete with photographer and fawning relatives." I recounted the evening's events in detail, watching Amelia's expression shift from concern to outrage. "That's not just favoritism, Gabriel. That was deliberately cruel," she said, her voice tight with anger on my behalf. "What are you going to do now?" I took her hand. "Exactly what Grandpa prepared me for. It's time they learned who actually owns everything they just promised to Tyler." "How do you think they'll react?" she asked. I considered this for a moment, with disbelief, then anger, then desperate negotiation. But I'm done protecting them from the consequences of their actions. Amelia squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens, I'm with you. And for what it's worth, I think your grandfather would be proud of how long you tried to give them a chance." As we went to bed that night, I felt an unfamiliar sensation, not happiness exactly, but a releasing of a burden I'd carried for too long. The pretense was over. In 2 days, my family would discover the reality they had been living in all along. And despite everything, I found I was looking forward to the revelation. Tyler's speech accepting his illusory inheritance played in my mind as I drifted off to sleep. He'd promised to modernize and streamline the business, the very things I'd already been doing for years. He'd outlined changes to investment strategies that would have been disastrous if implemented. And throughout, he'd made subtle digs at my uninspired approach to life. It was perhaps fitting that his moment of greatest triumph would also be his last moment of blissful ignorance. By Monday afternoon, the world as my family understood it would be irrevocably changed. Sunday passed quietly. I silenced my phone after the first few messages from family members, some expressing disappointment in my poor sportsmanship for leaving early, others awkwardly trying to smooth things over with platitudes about how there would always be a place for me in Tyler's new vision for the company. Instead of responding, I spent the day with Amelia, hiking in the woods outside the city and enjoying a peace that came from finally letting go of expectations that had never been realistic. That evening, I prepared the documents I would need for my meeting with Patricia. Monday morning, I arrived at Patricia Winter's downtown office precisely at 9. Though in her 60s, Patricia's mind remained razor-sharp, and her reputation as one of Boston's most formidable attorneys was well-earned. "I've been expecting this day since William passed," she said, gesturing for me to sit across from her imposing mahogany desk. "Though I admit, I'm surprised you waited this long." "I promised him I'd give them a chance," I replied simply. Patricia nodded. "A promise you've more than fulfilled." She opened a thick folder on her desk. "I've prepared everything. The timing is actually fortuitous. Several of the ownership transfers have fully matured in legal terms. Your grandfather structured things to become increasingly solid over time. We spent 2 hours reviewing documents, signing papers, and discussing strategy. By 11, everything was in order." "How do you want to proceed with notification?" Patricia asked. I had given this considerable thought. I want the facts to speak for themselves. No emotional appeals, no accusations, just the legal reality. Patricia smiled slightly. "William said you'd want to take the high road. I've drafted communications accordingly." By noon, everything was in motion. Patricia sent an official email to my father, mother, and Tyler with the relevant legal documents attached. Simultaneously, the family accountant received confirmation of the ownership structures, with instructions to verify their authenticity to anyone who asked. Finally, I composed a simple message to the family group chat, where the celebratory messages about Tyler's inheritance were still flowing. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about ownership of the family assets. Please check the email from Patricia Winters for clarification. I'm available to discuss next steps when you've had time to review the documents." I returned to my office and waited. The response was predictably swift and chaotic. My phone began buzzing incessantly within minutes. First came disbelieving texts accusing me of forgery or trickery. Then angry calls that I let go to voicemail. The family group chat exploded with confusion and accusations. "This has to be a mistake. What kind of stunt is Gabriel pulling? These documents can't be real. Has anyone called our attorney?" I maintained radio silence, letting Patricia handle the initial legal questions. By mid-afternoon, the tone began shifting as verification came in from multiple sources. The family accountant confirmed the ownership structures. The family attorney admitted he'd been aware of some unusual arrangements in Grandpa William's estate, but hadn't known the full extent. Around 4, my assistant informed me that my parents had arrived at my office building and were demanding to see me. I asked her to send them up, preparing myself for the confrontation. They burst into my office without knocking. My father red-faced with anger, my mother pale and trembling. Both looked as though they hadn't slept. "What the hell is going on, Gabriel?" my father demanded, slapping a stack of papers onto my desk. "These documents Patricia sent, claiming you own everything. What kind of game are you playing?" I remained seated, maintaining my composure. "It's not a game, Dad. Grandpa William transferred ownership to me gradually over the last 5 years of his life. Everything has been legal and properly filed. I'm surprised your attorneys never noticed." "This is impossible," my mother interjected. "Your grandfather would never do this to Tyler, to us." "He did it because he was concerned about the future of what he built," I replied evenly. "And based on last night's dinner, I'd say his concerns were well-founded." My father's face darkened further. "So this is revenge for not giving you enough attention? For recognizing your brother's potential instead of yours?" I shook my head. "This isn't about revenge. This is about responsible stewardship of a family legacy. Grandpa made his decision based on who he believed would protect and grow what he built. I've honored his wishes and kept everything running smoothly for 3 years while you thought you were in charge." "What is that supposed to mean?" my father demanded. "It means that every major business decision you've taken credit for in the past 3 years came from my suggestions. The portfolio restructuring, the shift toward mixed-use developments, the technology integration. Those were my ideas that I fed to you in ways that let you believe they were yours." My mother collapsed into a chair, the reality finally beginning to sink in. "This can't be happening. We just announced to the entire family that Tyler would inherit everything. Yes, you did, I acknowledged. Without consulting me, the actual owner. Without acknowledging years of my contributions. While stating explicitly that Tyler is the only one who's ever made you proud, despite his track record of failures. My father's anger seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by a dawning pragmatism. We can work something out, Gabriel. There's no need for drastic measures. The announcement was premature, perhaps, but we're family. We are family, I agreed. Which is why I haven't made any drastic changes for 3 years, despite having the legal right to do so. I've allowed you to live in the family home, run the business, and access the accounts, all while you continued to diminish my contributions and elevate Tyler's failures. Before they could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Amelia. Tyler is at our house. Should I let him in? I texted back quickly. I'll handle it. On my way. Standing up, I gathered my jacket. We'll need to have a family meeting to discuss how we move forward. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m., at Grandpa's study in the family house. Bring Tyler. I moved toward the door, indicating the conversation was over. You can't just walk away from this discussion, my father protested, though his voice lacked its earlier force. I've been walking away from difficult discussions with this family for 32 years, I replied. This time, I'm setting the terms of engagement. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. I left them standing in my office, stunned by the reversal of power dynamics that had defined our relationship for decades. For the first time in my life, I was the one walking away from them, rather than being the one left behind. When I arrived home, Tyler was sitting on my front steps, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, his expression vacillating between anger and panic. "We need to talk, bro," he said as I approached. I unlocked the door and gestured for him to follow me inside. Amelia made herself scarce, squeezing my shoulder supportively as she headed upstairs to give us privacy. "Is it true?" Tyler asked once we were seated in my living room. "You own everything? The business, the house, all of it?" "Yes," I replied simply. "How long have you known?" "Since before Grandpa died." Tyler ran his hands through his hair, visibly struggling to process this information. "Why didn't you say anything? You let me make a fool of myself in front of the whole family last night." "No, Tyler," I corrected him. "You and our parents arranged that entire spectacle yourselves. I simply chose not to interrupt it." He was quiet for a moment, then attempted a different approach. "Look, I know things haven't always been fair between us. Mom and Dad obviously favored me, and I probably took advantage of that." His voice took on a conciliatory tone I'd never heard from him before. "But we're brothers. We should be able to work something out between us, without lawyers and formal meetings." It was the closest thing to an admission of unfairness I'd ever heard from him, but I recognized the manipulation beneath it, the same charm he'd always used to get his way. "There will be a family meeting tomorrow at 7, I said firmly. "We'll discuss everything then." "Come on, Gabe," he pressed, using the childhood nickname he knew I disliked. "Remember when we were kids and I covered for you when you broke Dad's golf trophy? I've always had your back in my own way." The memory he referenced was completely fabricated. I had never broken any of our father's possessions, and Tyler had certainly never covered for me. The blatant attempt at manufacturing a shared history of brotherhood was so transparent it was almost sad. 7 p.m. tomorrow, Tyler, I repeated, standing up to indicate our conversation was over, and I'd suggest coming prepared to listen rather than negotiate. After Tyler left, Amelia came downstairs and wrapped her arms around me. "How did it go?" "About as expected," I replied. "First anger, then disbelief, then attempted manipulation. Tomorrow will be the real test, when they've had time to consult their lawyers and realize that legally they have no recourse." "Are you ready for that?" she asked. I nodded. For the first time in my life, I'm walking into a family meeting holding all the cards. It's not about revenge, but it is about finally establishing truth and consequences. That night, as messages continued flooding my phone, I felt strangely calm. Tomorrow would be difficult, possibly even heartbreaking, but also necessary. The years of invisibility were finally over. The next evening, I arrived at the family home 30 minutes early to prepare. This house, a stately Victorian in Boston's historic Beacon Hill neighborhood, had been in the family since my great-grandfather purchased it in the 1920s. I had countless memories within these walls, some painful, many involving being overlooked, but also precious moments with Grandpa William in his study, where tonight's meeting would take place. Patricia Winters arrived shortly after me, carrying her briefcase and the confident air of someone who had anticipated this confrontation for years. We set up in Grandpa's study, a wood-paneled room lined with books that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco. I arranged chairs in a semicircle facing the massive desk, where Grandpa had taught me about business and life. "Are you certain you don't want me to lead this discussion?" Patricia asked as we prepared. "I need to do this myself," I replied, "but I appreciate your being here for legal clarification if needed." My family arrived precisely at 7. My parents, Tyler, and surprisingly, my aunts and uncles as well. They filed in silently, faces tense with a mixture of anger, confusion, and in some cases, calculation. I could practically see them assessing how this revelation might affect their own financial interests. "Thank you for coming," I began once everyone was seated. "I know the past 2 days have been shocking for all of you." "Shocking is an understatement," my father interrupted. "Our family has been thrown into chaos by these claims." "Not claims, Robert," Patricia interjected smoothly. "Legal facts that have been in place for years." I gestured toward a projector screen I'd set up. I thought it would be helpful to begin by clarifying exactly what the ownership situation is, how it came to be, and what it means going forward. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented evidence of my contributions to the family business over the past 3 years. I showed emails where I had suggested strategies that my father later presented as his own. I displayed financial records revealing how my interventions had saved the company during several critical junctures. I outlined a detailed timeline of Tyler's business failures alongside the exact amounts our parents had spent bailing him out, nearly $2 million over 8 years. The room remained uncomfortably silent throughout my presentation. My mother kept her eyes down, occasionally dabbing at tears. My father's jaw tightened progressively with each slide. Tyler alternated between looking defiant and defeated. "Now to address the legal structure," I continued, nodding to Patricia, who distributed folders to everyone present. "These documents outline exactly what Grandpa William arranged. The family business, the house we're sitting in, and the majority of investment accounts were transferred to my ownership through a series of legal maneuvers, beginning 5 years before his death." My Uncle Philip spoke up for the first time. "Why would William do this? Cut out his own son in favor of his grandson? It makes no sense." In response, I played an audio recording. Grandpa William's voice, slightly weakened by illness but still commanding, explaining his decision. He spoke of his concerns about the business's future, his observations of both me and Tyler over the years, and his confidence that I would protect the family legacy while ensuring everyone was treated fairly. "I love my son," Grandpa's voice stated clearly, "but Robert has never had the patience or discipline for long-term business success. And while Tyler has charm and enthusiasm, he lacks the judgment and consistency needed to steward what I've built. Gabriel has demonstrated both the ability and the character needed to preserve the Mitchell legacy for future generations." When the recording ended, the room remained silent for several long moments. My father stared at the floor, his expression unreadable. "There's more," I said gently, and played a second recording. This one specifically addressed to my parents. "Robert and Margaret," Grandpa's voice began, "if you're hearing this, it means you've discovered the arrangements I've made regarding the family assets. I suspect you're surprised and possibly hurt by my decision. But I ask you to reflect honestly on how you've treated your sons. Gabriel has demonstrated every quality you should value: intelligence, diligence, integrity. Yet you've consistently overlooked him in favor of Tyler, despite evidence that Tyler is not prepared for the responsibilities you've tried to give him. I hope this revelation prompts some soul-searching about the damage your favoritism has caused, not just to Gabriel, but to Tyler as well, by never holding him accountable." By the time this recording finished, my mother was openly crying, and even my father looked shaken. Tyler sat with his head in his hands. "I didn't reveal this arrangement for 3 years, I explained into the heavy silence. "Grandpa asked me to give you the chance to recognize my contributions on your own. I kept the business successful from behind the scenes. I allowed you to continue living exactly as you had been. I could have made changes at any time, but I honored his wish that you might eventually see me clearly without being forced to. And then we announced Tyler would inherit everything. my mother said quietly, finally understanding the timing. You didn't just announce it, I corrected her. You staged an elaborate public event specifically to celebrate Tyler while diminishing me. You stated explicitly that he was the only one who'd ever made you proud, despite his track record of failures and my consistent success. My father finally looked up, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. What happens now? Are you going to throw us out of our home? Take control of everything? I'm going to do what I should have done 3 years ago. Establish clear boundaries and expectations, I replied. I've prepared a document outlining my terms moving forward. I distributed another set of papers, watching as my family members began reading with trepidation. As you can see, I'm not dispossessing anyone. You and Mom can continue living in this house, though the ownership will remain in my name. The business will be restructured with me as CEO and final authority on major decisions, though Dad can maintain his public role if he agrees to certain conditions about transparency and consultation. I turned to Tyler. You'll be offered a position in the company commensurate with your actual skills, not an inflated title. You'll have mentorship and the opportunity to learn the business properly, but you'll be held accountable for your performance like any other employee. My terms continued, covering financial distributions, decision-making processes, and expectations for family interactions going forward. They were firm but fair, honoring Grandpa's wish that the family be taken care of while protecting his legacy from mismanagement. As they read, the atmosphere in the room gradually shifted. The initial shock and anger began giving way to a reluctant recognition of reality. My father, ever the pragmatist, was likely calculating that my terms were actually quite generous given the alternatives. You've clearly put thought into this, he finally said, his voice lacking its usual authority. I've had 3 years to consider what's fair and what's necessary, I replied. My mother looked up from the papers, her eyes red. Did we really make you feel so undervalued all these years? It was the first genuine question about my experience I could remember her asking. Yes, I answered simply. You did. I never realized, she began, but couldn't seem to finish the thought. Tyler spoke next, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. So all this time, while everyone was praising me, you were actually running things? Not entirely, I said. Dad still handled day-to-day operations. But the major strategic decisions, the ones that actually kept the company profitable, yes, those were mine. A heavy silence fell again, as decades of family dynamics were reassessed in light of these revelations. My Uncle James finally broke it with an unexpected chuckle. William always did play the long game, he said, shaking his head with something like admiration. He saw all of this coming years ago. He gave me a chance that no one else in this family ever did, I agreed. He looked past the surface and saw potential where the rest of you saw. Well, I'm not sure you saw me at all most of the time. This statement hung in the air, its simple truth impossible to deny after the evidence I'd presented. One by one, family members began nodding slightly, some reluctantly, others with dawning understanding. What do you need from us now? My father asked, his voice holding a note of defeat I'd never heard before. I need acknowledgement of reality, I replied, recognition of my contributions, respect for my authority over what is legally mine, and a commitment to the terms I've outlined if you want to maintain your positions and benefits. He nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. I also need time, I added. This isn't going to be instantly fixed after a lifetime of being overlooked. Trust will need to be rebuilt on all sides. For the next hour, we discussed specific points in my proposal. There were questions, clarifications, and a few negotiated adjustments. Throughout, I maintained firm boundaries while remaining open to reasonable compromise. Patricia occasionally provided legal context, but allowed me to lead the discussion as I'd requested. By the end of the evening, the initial shock had evolved into a tentative acceptance of the new reality. Nothing was fully resolved. Decades of family dynamics couldn't be untangled in a single meeting. But the truth had been spoken aloud, perhaps for the first time. As family members began to leave, their departures were subdued. Some avoided eye contact, still processing their shifted understanding of family history. Others made awkward attempts at reconciliatory gestures, a tentative hand on my shoulder, a murmured acknowledgement. My parents were the last to leave, lingering uncertainly in the study doorway. We need to talk more, my mother said. Just the four of us. There's so much to understand. There is, I agreed. But not tonight. We all need time to process. My father extended his hand formally, a businessman's gesture. You've handled this with more grace than I might have in your position. I shook his hand, recognizing the significant effort this small acknowledgement required from him. I learned from Grandpa, I replied simply. After they left, I remained in the study alone, sitting in my grandfather's chair. I ran my hands over the worn leather armrests where his hands had rested during our many conversations. I kept my promise, Grandpa, I said softly to the empty room. I gave them every chance. And now, I'll protect what you built, the right way. The weeks following the confrontation were difficult. Family gatherings were tense and awkward. My parents oscillated between reluctant acceptance of the new reality and attempts to revert to old patterns. Tyler vacillated between resentment and forced humility as he adjusted to his greatly reduced status. Extended family members took sides, some recognizing the justice in what had happened, others viewing me as having betrayed family loyalty. The hardest conversations were the one-on-one discussions with my parents. Years of unspoken hurt and resentment couldn't be addressed in a single meeting. My mother cried during our first private talk, claiming she'd never realized how their treatment had affected me. My father struggled more, his pride making it difficult for him to acknowledge the fundamental unfairness of their parenting. We always thought you were fine, my mother insisted during one particularly emotional conversation. You were so self-sufficient, so capable on your own. Tyler seemed to need more support. Being competent shouldn't have meant being ignored, I replied gently. And constantly rescuing Tyler from his mistakes wasn't support, it was enabling behavior that prevented him from growing up. These conversations were painful but necessary. Amelia provided unwavering support throughout, offering perspective when I became too emotionally entangled and reminding me to maintain boundaries when needed. Healing doesn't mean forgetting, she told me one evening after a particularly draining family dinner. It means building something new with clear eyes about the past. I found that wisdom especially helpful as I navigated the complicated emotional landscape of family reconciliation. I wasn't seeking revenge or even complete vindication. I wanted understanding and a healthier family dynamic moving forward. Tyler's journey was perhaps the most surprising. After the initial shock and resentment faded, he seemed almost relieved to have the pressure of expectations lifted. In his reduced role at the company, focusing on client relations where his charisma was an asset but with close supervision, he began to develop genuine skills for the first time. I never really believed I could handle everything they wanted me to, he confessed, during a rare moment of honesty about 6 weeks after the confrontation. I just didn't know how to say no to their expectations. They set us both up to fail in different ways, I acknowledged. You with impossible expectations, me with none at all. This shared recognition of our parents' flawed approach became an unexpected bridge between us. We weren't suddenly close brothers with a deep bond, but we began developing a more honest relationship built on reality rather than the family mythology that had defined our roles for decades. The business transformation was less emotionally fraught but equally significant. I officially took the CEO position, implementing changes I'd been suggesting from the shadows for years. My father remained as chairman, a role that utilized his connections and public-facing skills while limiting his decision-making authority. Initially, he chafed at the restrictions, occasionally attempting to circumvent the new structure. But as the company continued to thrive under my leadership, even he had to acknowledge the effectiveness of my approach. By the 6-month mark, he had settled into his redefined role with reasonable grace. You remind me of your grandfather more than I ever did, he admitted during a strategy meeting. And though complex emotions underlaid the statement, I chose to take it as the compliment it partially was. Through all of this, I found myself growing in unexpected ways. Having spent my life in the background, adjusting to visibility and authority required a different kind of strength. I had to learn to accept recognition graciously, to lead openly rather than from the shadows, to voice my opinions directly rather than planting them as seeds for others to discover. Amelia noticed this evolution one evening as we prepared dinner. You stand differently now, she observed, more upright, more present. Like you're finally comfortable taking up space in the world. She was right. The invisible weight of being perpetually overlooked had lifted. Even in difficult moments with my family, there was a freedom in being seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time. 9 months after the restaurant dinner that had precipitated everything, we held a holiday gathering at my home rather than the family house. Another subtle shift in the family power dynamic. As I looked around at my relatives mingling in my living room, I realized that while not everything was healed, much had changed for the better. My mother approached me as I stood observing the gathering. "This is nice," she said, gesturing to the decorated tree, and the family scattered in conversation groups. "Different, but nice." I nodded, accepting the olive branch for what it was. Change can be good sometimes. She hesitated, then asked the question I sensed had been troubling her for months. "Do you think you'll ever fully forgive us, Gabriel?" I considered this carefully. "I'm not sure forgiveness is the right framework," I replied honestly. "I think we're building a new relationship based on who we all actually are, rather than the roles we were assigned. That feels more important than forgiveness for the past." She nodded slowly, absorbing this. "Your grandfather would be proud of how you've handled all of this. He always saw something in you that we missed." "He saw me," I said simply. That was enough. Later that evening, as the gathering was winding down, I stepped onto my back deck for a moment of quiet reflection. Tyler joined me, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. He offered one silently, and we stood looking out at the winter sky. "You know," he said after a comfortable silence, "I used to think success was about big gestures and taking risks, the stuff Dad always praised me for. But watching you these past months, I'm starting to think it's more about consistency and integrity." "It can be both," I replied. "Risk has value when it's calculated, when there's substance behind it." He nodded thoughtfully. "I never had the substance part, just the flash." "You're developing it now," I observed. "When you're not trying to be what they wanted you to be." He raised his glass slightly. "To substance, then." I clinked my glass against his. "And to finding your own path." It wasn't a perfect Hollywood reconciliation, but it was real. A moment of genuine understanding between 2 brothers who had been pitted against each other by parental favoritism for too long. When I returned inside, Amelia was deep in conversation with my mother, both of them laughing over some shared story. My father was explaining something to my uncle with less pomposity than his usual pronouncements. The family dynamics were shifting, recalibrating into something healthier, more balanced. I realized then that my grandfather's true legacy wasn't the business or the properties. It was this opportunity for healing, for truth, for a family to rebuild itself on a foundation of reality rather than illusion. By arranging for me to hold the legal power, he had created the leverage needed to break decades of unhealthy patterns. The journey hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over. There would be more difficult conversations, more moments of backsliding into old patterns, more work to be done in establishing new, healthier relationships. But for the first time, I felt hopeful about my family's future, not as the invisible son, not as the overlooked brother, but as Gabriel, finally seen and acknowledged for who I truly was. Life has taught me that true respect must be earned, not demanded. Family love should be unconditional, but healthy relationships require honesty and boundaries. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean closing the door on reconciliation. And sometimes, the most powerful legacy isn't what you leave behind materially, but the truths you help others discover about themselves. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to family expectations that didn't honor who you really are? Leave a comment below sharing your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your voice and standing in your truth. Thank you for listening, and remember, being seen for who you truly are is worth fighting for, even when it means walking away from a table full of false promises.